I'm going to be talking about improving resiliency of urban trees to storm damage, and more specifically, how we can train trees and prune them to increase their longevity, to decrease the amount of damage that they receive during storms. We're never going to be able to prevent all damage to trees. When we have severe storms that come through on your left, that was 100+ mile-an-hour straight line wind in a storm in a cemetery, and it took out a large majority of the major trees in that cemetery. That type of damage, or on your right, that tree was damaged in Hurricane Charlie, 130 mile-an-hour sustained winds. Those types of storms were not going to be able to eliminate the damage to trees. What I'm talking about and we'll be talking about today is more of the type of damage that trees sustain in more medium-sized storms, what to look for, what we're learning through research, and how we can apply it in the field and help better care for our trees. So our goal is to minimize the damage. Here, just circled, is a smaller branch that was broken in the crown of that tree during a much more commonplace storm. So when damage occurs, what are we seeing? What types of things coincide with trees being damaged in storms? And observationally, frequently, there's some type of defect present. In Mark's presentation, the trees that were damaged and broken and on top of the storms, there were often cavities or included bark, codominant stems, et cetera. And I'll go over some more of those defects in detail, but defects are often present. Large trees are often more damaged than smaller trees. The forces near the top of the crown, higher away from the ground, especially with wind, those forces are greater on trees and increase the likelihood. And also it's more noticeable. If a small tree loses a branch, it's going to be a small branch by definition, and we really don't notice it as much. So trees growing in groups, in an urban environment, trees planted in groups tend to be damaged less frequently. Mary Duryea and others several years ago published some work on survey of several of the hurricanes that went through in Florida, and found both with the tropical and subtropical as well as the temperate trees that trees planted in groups tended to protect each other and buffer each other from the storms and receive less damage. And pruning certainly helps to reduce storm damage, and that's going to be a large crux of what I'm going to be talking about. But first, let's look at some of the defects that we see. We see codominant stems with and without included bark, cracks, decay. Taper is an important issue, as Mark brought up, and there are others as well. But starting with codominant stems, we've got two stems that are roughly the same size in diameter. You got the trunk wood and the branch wood that would typically overlap that don't, and that causes a weakness. And oftentimes as well, you have included bark that's present, where that arrow you see pointing, you've got those two ribs of wood coming down together, and there's no overlapping fibers between the two stems that would make a strong connection right there. Here you can see it in Populus. This is up in Wisconsin. You can see included bark at the top of that branch with those codominant stems. Everybody's favorite, I'm sure, Bradford pear. Has anybody ever seen Bradford pear get damaged in a storm? Yeah? Okay, well. Right here, it's kind of hard to see up towards the top. Right here, there's several stems all forking, originating in that same area. A couple years ago, the same thing happened right here. You can see these sprouting branches coming out from where that injury originally occurred on the other side. So just one by one, I'd imagine that this tree is going to be losing stems until it's eventually gone. Here's a double codominant split where you've got both of the branches splitting apart like a wishbone. Again, you've got the a little included bark there at the top and no overlapping fibers. A 20-foot long existing split. I was talking to the guy cutting up the wood at this house when I went by, and it was an old lady, and 98 or something like that, and she thought that there was a problem because whenever the wind blew, she saw the two stems doing this. So she had somebody come, and it was cabled. Unfortunately, the strength of the wind was too much, and the cable was quarter-inch diameter cable, which is the diameter of my pinky finger, so wasn't quite adequate when a really strong storm came through this area. Here's another codominant split, and along with this, we've got large fungal fruiting bodies, hollows in that split area, decay organisms up at the top of the tree that indicate rotting wood. That's my brother John in that picture, and I don't have nearly enough time today to go into his defects, but he helped me gather some data, and for that I was very much appreciative. So looking at an experiment that we had just finished here over the past couple months, and we're working on getting published, we looked at a study assessing branch attachment strength and what visibly recognizable characteristics affect attachment strength. So the morphological traits that we looked at were aspect ratio, which is the ratio of the branch diameter to the trunk diameter. When they're 1-to-1, that's called codominant, as we saw. So on the left, we've got a small aspect ratio, a small branch relative to the size of the trunk. And on the right, there's a large aspect ratio where they're about 1-to-1. We looked at included bark. Here you can see, again, those two branches where it ribs in or curls in versus forming a good branch bark ridge. And when opened up, you can see the included bark. Included bark, this dark area coming right down the stem. So this is the wood, the branch wood, and then this is actual bark from each of the respective branches, that dark area. The branch union shape, is it a U, like you see on the left, or a V, as you see on the right? This is our branch breaking apparatus. I tried to go to Walmart and buy one. They didn't have any, so I had to have it fabricated from scratch. And Bryant Scherenbrock, our soil scientist, was helping me carry this in, and people were mentioning how it looked like kind of a medieval torture device, and like, yeah, it does look like a medieval torture device. And then I thought, well, what can I do to really instill fear in the hearts of people in this area? So I painted it green and gold. My beloved Green Bay Packers, as we all know. Anyway, I don't want to get in too much trouble. So what do we find after let me go back for just a minute. What we did with this, this device, this is a load cell. It measures the force to failure. So we took the branch, this is the trunk, this is the branch, and we strapped it down, attached a webbing sling to the load cell, the device that measures the force. And then we've got a hand-operated winch, so we could control the pace at which we broke this branch union very carefully and pulled the branch until it failed. And our instrument measures force at once every 20 seconds we measured at. So we're getting a really, really good number of exactly where we were at when failure occurred. We did this study on Norway maple branches here at the Arboretum, and did collaboration with a group of researchers down at the University of Florida, and they did red maple down there. So 2 different species, same genus, in this study. And for red maple, these are the lines. The dark line is branches where there was included bark, and the dashed line is branches where there was no included bark in the union. And what you can see on the x-axis here, this is aspect ratio. So as the aspect ratio gets closer to 1, as they become more of the same size, this is the breaking stress, and the breaking stress decreases. And there's no difference in red maple branches about 1 centimeter to about 5 4 centimeters in diameter. So we're talking fairly small branches, but there's no difference in the breaking stress between the two different, whether or not there's included bark. For the Norway maple, we saw that the included bark was a little bit weaker, but not a lot weaker than branches that did not have included bark, but they were both equally affected by the aspect ratio. So although they were a little bit different, they both decreased equally as aspect ratio increased. A couple other findings. That aspect ratio is also closely tied to visible color. So for branches that had a collar, the aspect ratio is relatively small. Branches that lacked collars, it was higher. And the numbers were pretty similar for both species. Same with the union shape. The V-shaped unions had a larger aspect ratio than that U-shaped union. And there intended to be a lot more included bark with V-shaped unions versus U-shaped unions. So what that kind of shows is that when you have these, let me also say one other thing. Not all branches with included bark, this is another interesting finding, broke at that included bark union. This right here is the bark from the branch that pulled up and out from the stem wood. So the failure occurred out here in the branch wood rather than at the union with the trunk wood. And that bark just slid right out. So the branch itself was weaker than that union. And we found that that often happened, or more so happened, when that branch to trunk diameter was smaller. So, and yeah, here when that union was larger, you can see that the split occurred right down, this same picture from earlier. So, I'll get back to that in a moment. But looking at a couple other defects, cracks. Here you can see a large crack on the trunk with codominant stems. Here, a large spiraling crack down the trunk of the tree. And if you look, there's absolutely no root system down there. Obviously, a pretty major defect. Now, this branch, have you seen? Wow, it's really dark. Have you seen this? A lot in honey locust, I tend to see it, but you get that longitudinal, like lengthwise splitting where the branch curves, and it'll split, and the top of that split straightens out, and this kind of bows down, but then they're reconnected up here. I was driving down the street and just happened to notice this and pulled back around and went into the apartment complex parking lot. I didn't see any no trespassing signs. That I wasn't looking for them, but I didn't see them. And this is what I do for fun. And I got up close and I noticed right up here there's a pruning cut, and there's also 2.5 inches on either side, top and bottom, inch and a half, 2 inches of wound wood. So that has been there for quite a while. I don't know if they had done this reduction pruning cut to just get some weight off of there and leave it rather than make this large. It would have been about a 12-inch cut right at the trunk, but it's just interesting to see that there and tell that that had been there a while. So I'll get back to that when we discuss some issues of how to improve storm resiliency. Taper is another defect to trees that I think is a little bit, people don't think about it quite as often. And Mark had mentioned trees in the forest, when there's a lot of other trees around, you don't have a very tapered stem. But when you have trees that grow out in the open, they have a much greater tendency to become more tapered because of the wind forces. Okay, here's a Florida champion live oak. I mean, this is a big tree, about 8 or 9 feet in diameter. This branch was overextended, and you can see that the base of this branch has very little taper moving out into it. And there's the failure right there, close up of the failure where it split right away from the trunk. So it was overextended a lot of the way out at the end, and a storm came through and the forces were just too great, and the branch failed right at the union. And crown imbalance can also be a defect. I'm not going to really touch on this too much, but I mean, we're talking about that 8-foot circle away. Now, there's plenty of line clearance, I suppose, but whether or not this is the best way to prune trees is, at the very least, a question for debate. So, so away from the branch union, where do branches most often fail? And observationally, upright branches tend to fail much more often than horizontal branches. I did some work on this for my graduate work, and especially during a static loading, like during ice loading, you'll see that the branch, when it deflects, when it's being loaded, the radius of curvature of that branch in the upright branches tends to be a lot smaller, whereas a horizontal branch, when it's being loaded, it's got this large radius of curvature, and it's that component of it that causes these upright branches to snap much more frequently away from the union than horizontal branches. And work I worked on, it took about half as much stress to cause that failure than for uprights than for horizontal branches. And here you can see some storm damage, and on the left it's from an ice storm. On the right is the same picture from hurricane damage, and you can see that it's the upright branches that tend to be the ones that are gone. Even the horizontal branch down here, it didn't fail here, it failed at the upright portion. Same over here. Mostly it's, I mean, there's some smaller branches that horizontal, but by and large, it was more so the uprights. I'm just going to kind of go through these. My time's getting short here. So large branches. Here's the tree again. So improving structure. When we look at forest-grown trees, they often are in this X-current form, meaning they have a strong central leader. The branch diameter is small relative to the trunk, horizontally oriented, especially in shade-tolerant species. Branches tend to be much more well-spaced along the trunk. Low branches are often shed because of light availability issues. So in codominant branches, when they do occur in forest trees, tend to predominantly occur higher in the canopy. Not always, but generally speaking, these are the tendencies that we see in many forest-grown trees. We take these trees out of the forest where they've evolved over eons to have these type of growth patterns, and we put them in the wide open where they don't need to shed those lower branches. They're not suppressed because they get plenty of light, and this is where we're running into a lot of problems. Here's another good example. You got a tree with a good strong central leader and well-spaced branches, a very nice X-current form. And then we take them and we put them out into the landscape, put them out into the open, and this is where we start running into problems. When we don't take care of the trees and properly and prune them, we get these long, this huge overextended branch right here. There's a soccer field over here, a lot of targets, and not only is that branch, but when you look at a close-up of this thing, they added all the branches originating at the same place here too. You got all these branches originating at the same area. And by the time that they needed to do something about it, all the branches are too large, and you get this. Nothing to reduce this branch back to as far as being up over the fence and over the soccer field. And then you look on the other side, and you have all these large pruning wounds that lead to issues like trunk damage and root decay, and this tree is just a mess. So nothing like what we see from a tree growing in a forested setting. So, okay, 5 minutes. So what we're talking about taking care of these trees. How can we prune them? How can we care for them to go back to mimic where they've evolved to be more structurally sound? Structurally pruning trees is a pretty simple, effective way of doing this, we're finding. To encourage a central dominant leader is just ask yourself 3 basic questions. Where is the leader? What's competing with the leader? and where do I make that pruning cut to reduce that competition, to subordinate and suppress those branches. 3 types of pruning cuts that we can use: reduction, removal, and heading cuts. A reduction cut simply reduces the main primary stem back to a lateral branch. It'll slow the growth of the branch you pruned, increase the growth of the trunk, give you a better aspect ratio, make that branch union stronger, help develop a good branch collar. If you need to remove the branches at some point, most young branches that do need to be removed, you've got a removal cut right here. Here's the branch collar, the yellow lines where you'd make that removal cut. Heading cuts are typically not recommended. That's cutting between 2 branches or between 2 nodes. Maybe the only option that you've got if you have severe storm damage, however. So, well, like I said, we don't typically recommend them, but it may be an effective tool at certain times. Just looking at a couple quick examples. Here you've got a tree. Where's the leader? What's competing with it? What are the branches that are growing upright? The ones that want to go up and compete for dominance in the canopy. Make those cuts. Here you can see where the circles are, the reduction cuts, prune back. And also remember, looking back at that tree that had that terrible form where all those large branches were coming off of it, those should have all been temporary branches. The lower branches should be suppressed so that their size is small, and at some point they're going to be removed, and the bottom of that canopy should be starting much higher up so that when you have issues with clearance for traffic or pedestrians and everything else, you've got smaller branches higher up in the crown and you've got less to worry about down low. This is right in the parking lot at the Arboretum here. You can see in the yellow circles several reduction pruning cuts, maintain that nice leader. These have all been subordinated, pruned back. Here's a close-up. You can see the pruning cuts. And a lot of times you'll see sprouts forming at those pruning cuts. That's okay. The sprouts help protect. You just removed a lot of foliage and branches that protect the stem of the tree from the sun. So these sprouts that shoot out help to protect the branch from sun scald, and they also help slow the spread of discoloration and decay in that area as a result of the cut. So at the next pruning cycle, some of those sprouts probably should be managed, especially if they start rubbing and crossing, but for the intermittent time, that's okay. Here you see 2 trees. You got an X-current tree and a D-current tree. They're right next to each other. This is on the University of Tennessee campus. Same species, very different forms. Below there, those yellow lines, you see, okay, those are small subordinated branches already, but they're temporary. They're going to be coming off. It's up above that we need to worry about. So you've got that major codominant stem on the left and the smaller one up on the right. So that's where you need to deal with them. And when you think about the size of the cut, the smaller your cut, the smaller the smaller of a wound you put on the tree, the more you're going to reduce the spread of the decay. If you give me 2 minutes, I'm going to get through the mature trees, and then I'll have time for a couple quick questions. So it's important to remember that with mature trees, you only remove tissue if you've got a really good reason. Minimize the risk of limb failure, but you want to make sure that if you do prune on mature trees, you're going to want to do it out on the periphery. And a small amount of reduction out at the periphery can really reduce the forces from wind, snow, and ice that the tree receives, because you've got a longer lever arm. So it compounds the amount of force that's experienced further down on the tree. And wind speeds tend to be higher the further you get from the ground, so the forces up there are greater. So a small amount of reduction can make a big deal on reducing the amount of force and stress that act on trees. And 5 to 15% is probably enough in most cases. 25% is the recommended maximum, but that's only in my opinion, extreme cases. So you look at a large mature tree like this where you've got a good central leader, it's got some sizable branches. Looking up into the crown of this tree, you can see several small reduction cuts, 2, 3 inches, 4 inches, that have really brought this canopy back. Also, there's what's called a cobra cable. It's a dynamic cable right here on the tree. Those are typically put in at roughly 2/3 perhaps of the height of the tree. But you can see that they're pretty close to the top, so I presume this cable was put in before that reduction pruning was done. So this tree has a lot of significance to where it is, and they've done a number of measures to reduce the likelihood of failure to that tree. So some key points to improving structure. Horizontal branch orientation, they tend to be less susceptible to storm damage. Small aspect ratio, research is showing what we've done here and what other people have done, that the small aspect ratio branches are more strongly attached. And you want to keep your pruning cuts small, less than 4 inches in diameter is ideal. And the best way to do that is start when they're young. I would start at planting. Get good structure at planting. If you're not going to be able to get back to these trees for a number of years, do it right away. I mean, you're not reducing a whole lot of the structure of the tree. So otherwise, if you're really worried, you could just do this.